People always say that no matter what happens in life, your parents will be the first people to celebrate your happiness. I believe that. For 34 years, I believed that with every part of my heart. Then one afternoon, standing on the front porch of the first house I had ever owned, I watched my mother cry. Not because she was proud of me. Not because I had finally achieved something I'd worked toward for almost 15 years. She cried because, in her words, "I guess you've decided you don't need your family anymore." I remember standing there with the keys still in my hand, smiling because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. My father wouldn't even step inside. He looked at the brick walls, the freshly painted porch, the little flower beds I had planted with my own hands, and simply shook his head. "This is too much for one person," he muttered. That should have been the moment I understood. But love makes excuses. Especially when it's the love a daughter has for her parents. What I didn't know that afternoon was that those tears weren't about losing me. They were about losing control. And before everything was over, they wouldn't just ask for my happiness. They would ask for my home. My name is Emma Collins. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that if I worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, and sacrificed quietly enough, everything would eventually make sense. I was wrong. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where everyone knew everyone. My father worked construction. My mother stayed home when my younger brother Ryan and I were children before taking part-time jobs at grocery stores and schools. We weren't rich. We weren't poor. We simply survived. Growing up, Ryan was always special. Not because he had an illness. Not because he struggled. Simply because he was the only son. Everything in our house revolved around him. When Ryan wanted a new bicycle, my parents somehow found the money. When I needed glasses, my mother suggested I sit closer to the television. When Ryan failed math, they hired him a tutor. When I earned straight A's, my father looked over my report card and said, "That's what you're supposed to do." No celebration. No hugs. No proud smiles. Just expectations. I learned something very young. If I wanted affection, I had to earn it. If I wanted attention, I had to deserve it. So I became the responsible child. The quiet child. The one who never complained. When Ryan forgot his homework, I drove it to school. When he crashed his first car, my college savings somehow disappeared to help replace it. No one asked how I felt. They simply assumed I would understand. And I always did. Or at least, I pretended to. By the time I was 18, I had won a scholarship to Ohio State University. It wasn't enough to cover everything. So I worked. Morning shifts at a coffee shop. Evening shifts at the campus library. Weekend babysitting. I slept 4 or 5 hours most nights. Some days I cried in the shower because I was so exhausted. But I never told my parents. Whenever my mother called, she always asked the same question. "Did Ryan send you that package?" Not, "How are your classes?" Not, "Are you eating enough?" Always Ryan. Always someone else. Still, I loved them. Because that's what daughters do. At least, that's what I believed. After graduation, I moved to Chicago. The city terrified me. The buildings were taller than anything I'd ever seen. The trains were loud. The streets never seemed to sleep. I rented a tiny apartment that was barely larger than my childhood bedroom. The refrigerator hummed louder than the television. The windows leaked cold air every winter. Sometimes I ate instant noodles for 3 days straight because rent came first. But every month, without fail, I sent money home. Not because they demanded it. Because I wanted to help. Dad's back hurt. Mom worked long hours. Ryan was trying to figure things out. That phrase became permanent. Trying to figure things out. At 23. At 26. At 29. At 32. Ryan was always trying. Meanwhile, I kept working. Promotions came slowly. Receptionist. Administrative assistant. Office coordinator. Operations manager. Every title represented another year of overtime. Another year of skipped vacations. Another year of saying no to things I wanted. I watched coworkers buy new cars. I drove the same old Honda for 11 years. I watched friends travel to Europe. I stayed home and added another $100 to my savings account. Every decision had one goal. One dream. A house. Not a mansion. Not anything extravagant. Just a place where no landlord could tell me to leave. A place with a little backyard. A kitchen with sunlight. A front porch where I could drink coffee in the mornings. It sounds simple. But for me, it became everything. When I turned 33, something incredible happened. After years of saving. Years of sacrifice. Years of saying, maybe next time. I finally had enough for a down payment. I still remember sitting inside the bank. My hands were shaking. The loan officer smiled. Congratulations, Emma. That single word nearly made me cry. Congratulations. It was the first time someone had celebrated all the invisible work behind my dream. I drove home that afternoon with tears rolling down my face. Happy tears. The kind I'd imagined sharing with my parents. I couldn't wait to tell them. I called Mom first. Guess what? What? I qualified for a mortgage. Silence. Not excitement. Silence. Then. That sounds like a lot of responsibility. I laughed awkwardly. It is. But I'm ready. That was all. Just. Then she asked. Did you hear Ryan lost another job? Of course. Ryan. Always Ryan. I ignored the disappointment. Maybe she was distracted. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she'd be happier once she saw the house. That's what I told myself. Weeks later, I found it. A 2-bedroom brick home on a quiet street lined with maple trees. It wasn't huge. But it was beautiful. Cream-colored walls. Hardwood floors. A tiny fireplace. A kitchen window overlooking a small backyard. There was even an old oak tree that shaded half the garden. The previous owner had left behind rose bushes. Pink. White. Yellow. I walked through every room with my realtor. She smiled. I think you've already fallen in love. She was right. I had. The moment I stepped into the living room. It felt like home. Not because it was perfect. Because it felt peaceful. For the first time in my life. I imagined a future that belonged only to me. No chaos. No constant sacrifice. No waiting. Just peace. Closing day arrived on a warm Thursday morning. The papers seemed endless. Sign here. Initial here. Another signature. Another page. Finally. The realtor handed me a small silver key. Welcome home. I held it in my palm for almost a full minute. Such a tiny thing. Yet it represented 15 years of hard work. 15 years of believing in a dream no one else seemed to understand. I unlocked the front door. Walked inside. Closed it behind me. And stood in complete silence. No traffic. No neighbors. No voices. Just me. I whispered the words I'd dreamed of saying for years. I made it. Then I cried. Not because I was sad. Because for the first time, I felt safe. The next weekend, I invited my parents and Ryan to see the house. I spent 2 days cleaning every corner. I baked my mother's favorite apple pie from scratch. I bought fresh flowers. I even framed an old family photograph and placed it on the fireplace mantel. I wanted them to know there was always a place for them here. When their car finally pulled into the driveway, my heart raced. This was the moment. The moment I'd imagined for years. I hurried outside, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. Mom stepped out first. She looked around slowly. Dad stayed beside the car. Ryan barely looked up from his phone. "Welcome," I said excitedly. "Come see everything." My mother forced a small smile. "Oh." She looked at the house again. "It's bigger than I expected." I laughed. "It's only 2 bedrooms." Dad folded his arms. "Must have cost a fortune." "I saved for years." He didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the porch without another word. I unlocked the front door. The smell of fresh paint and cinnamon filled the air. "I hope you like it." Mom walked into the living room. She glanced around. Then into the kitchen. Then upstairs. Her face grew harder with every room. Ryan finally spoke. "Nice place." Before I could thank him, he added, "I could never afford something like this." The room fell strangely quiet. I smiled awkwardly. Well, it took a long time. No one responded. The silence felt heavy. Uncomfortable. Different from anything I'd expected. Then my mother looked directly at me. Her eyes suddenly filled with tears. Real tears. My stomach tightened. "Mom?" She swallowed. Her voice trembled. "I just never thought." She paused, wiping her eyes. "That one day you'd have more than your own parents." I stood frozen. The smile slowly disappeared from my face. I opened my mouth to respond. But no words came. Because something deep inside me, something I couldn't yet explain, whispered that this day wasn't going to end the way I'd dreamed. And I had no idea. It was only the beginning. My mother's tears filled the room with a silence that felt heavier than any words. I had imagined this day 1,000 times. In every version, my father would clap me on the shoulder and tell me he was proud. My mother would hug me and cry because her daughter had accomplished something she once only dreamed about. Ryan might tease me for becoming a real homeowner. Instead, my father stared out the kitchen window like he was inspecting flaws in the backyard. Ryan wandered through the hallway with one hand in his pocket and the other holding his phone. And my mother's tears. They didn't look like happy tears. They looked like grief. I forced myself to smile. "Mom." I stepped closer. "Why are you crying?" She shook her head. "It's nothing." "It doesn't look like nothing." She sighed and looked around the living room. "I guess life changes." I waited. She didn't continue. Instead, she turned toward the dining room table where I'd carefully arranged lunch. The apple pie had cooled perfectly. There was roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and the lemonade she'd always made for us when we were kids. I had spent hours preparing everything. Not because I had to. Because I wanted this house to feel like home for them too. We sat around the table. No one spoke much. The silence made every small sound seem louder. Forks touching plates. Ice shifting inside glasses. The ticking clock on the wall. Finally, I asked. So, what do you think? Dad shrugged. It's a house. I laughed nervously. I know it's a house. I mean. Do you like it? He cut another piece of chicken before answering. It seems expensive. I stayed within my budget. You'll be paying on it for 30 years. I hope to pay it off sooner. Another shrug. You never know what can happen. That was all. No congratulations. No smile. Just another warning. Ryan leaned back in his chair. I wish I had your salary. I smiled politely. You could. He frowned. What does that mean? I just mean. You've always been really smart. If you found something you loved and stuck with it. He laughed. Easy for you to say. You've always been lucky. Lucky. That word landed harder than I expected. Lucky? I'd worked weekends for years. I'd skipped birthdays because I was working overtime. I'd worn the same winter coat for almost a decade. I'd turned down vacations. I'd eaten instant noodles. I'd repaired my own furniture from thrift stores. Lucky. I almost laughed. Instead, I quietly said. I don't think it was luck. Ryan rolled his eyes. Whatever helps you sleep. Mom immediately changed the subject. So. She looked around. Do you really need all this space? I blinked. It's only 2 bedrooms. But you're alone. I might not always be. She looked at me carefully. You planning on getting married soon? I smiled. I hope someday. That sound again. Not happiness. Not curiosity. Just. Disapproval. After lunch, I showed them the backyard. The old oak tree stretched across almost half the lawn. Its branches moved gently in the summer breeze. I want to build a little garden, I said. Maybe tomatoes. Some herbs. Dad looked at the fence. It'll need replacing. I know. The roof looks old. The inspection said it's still in good condition. The driveway has cracks. I'll fix those eventually. Every dream I shared. He answered with another problem. It wasn't advice. It felt like he was searching for reasons my happiness shouldn't exist. When they finally left that evening, I hugged Mom tightly. She hugged me back, but something felt distant. Like she was embracing a stranger. Dad shook my hand instead of hugging me. Ryan said. Maybe I'll have a place like this someday. I smiled. I hope you do. He looked around one more time before getting into the car. I'd settle for this one. I laughed because I thought he was joking. He didn't laugh back. The car disappeared down the street. I stood on my porch waving until they turned the corner. Then I walked back inside. The house suddenly felt different. Not empty. Heavy. As if someone had opened a window and let cold air inside. That night, my best friend Julia called. So? She sounded excited. How did it go? I hesitated. It was strange. What happened? I sat on the living room floor with my back against the couch. They weren't happy. Julia was quiet. What do you mean? They just. I don't know. It felt like I'd done something wrong. You bought a house. I know. They should have been celebrating. I know. She paused before asking softly. Emma. Have they ever celebrated your success? The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth. Then closed it again. My mind searched through years of memories. Graduating with honors. Getting promoted. Receiving awards at work. Paying off my student loans. Every achievement. Every milestone. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Had they ever truly celebrated me? The answer came quietly. No. Not really. Julia sighed. I think you've spent your whole life trying to earn something they've never learned how to give. I wanted to disagree. Instead, I cried. The following Monday, I went back to work. My coworkers couldn't stop asking about the house. Have you unpacked? Did you survive moving? When's the housewarming party? Their excitement warmed me. It reminded me that what I'd accomplished really was something worth celebrating. My manager, Linda, handed me a small gift bag. A little something. Inside was a welcome mat. It read, "Home is where peace lives." I smiled so hard my eyes filled with tears again. Linda noticed. You okay? My parents didn't exactly love the house. She frowned. Why? I don't know. They acted like I'd betrayed them somehow. Linda looked at me thoughtfully. Then she said something I would think about for months afterward. Some people confuse your independence with your rejection. That evening, Mom called. For a brief moment, I thought maybe she'd reflected on the visit. Maybe she wanted to apologize. Maybe she'd simply been overwhelmed. Hi, Mom. How's the house? It's wonderful. Good. A pause. Then. Ryan's having a hard time. Of course. Ryan. What happened? He fell behind on rent. Oh. The landlord gave him 30 days. I'm sorry. Another pause. Then she asked. How many bedrooms did you say your house has? I looked toward the hallway. 2. There it was again. That little sound. So. You have a spare room. I do. You know. Family helps family. I smiled. If Ryan needs a place for a few weeks while he gets back on his feet, I'd be happy to help. Mom immediately sounded relieved. I knew you'd say that. I hesitated. I should probably talk to Ryan first. Oh, he'll love the idea. I didn't say he was moving in. Just that we'd talk. She laughed softly. You're too kind, Emma. We ended the call. Something about it bothered me. Not the idea of helping Ryan. I would have done that without hesitation. It was how quickly my new home had gone from being too much for one person to becoming a solution for someone else. A few days later, Ryan showed up unannounced. He walked through the front door carrying a 6-pack of soda and acting unusually cheerful. Nice place. Thanks. He wandered into the kitchen. You've got good taste. We talked for almost an hour. It was one of the easiest conversations we'd had in years. Then. He casually asked. So. Which room would be mine? I blinked. What? The guest room. I'll probably paint it. Maybe put my gaming setup in there. I laughed. Ryan. I never said you were moving in. He stopped smiling. Mom said you offered. I offered to help if you needed somewhere temporarily. Exactly. Temporarily. He folded his arms. What difference does it make? It's my house. He stared at me. Then, for the first time that afternoon, his expression changed. The friendliness disappeared. You've changed. I frowned. What? You used to care about family. I do. No. You care about your house. His words stung. I worked hard for this. So did Dad. I almost answered. But stopped. Because it wasn't true. Dad had worked hard. Very hard. But Dad had never worked toward this. This was my dream. My sacrifice. My years. And somehow, defending it already made me feel guilty. Ryan grabbed his keys. I'll figure something out. Before leaving, he looked around one last time. I just hope you remember who was there before you had all this. The front door closed behind him. The silence that followed was unbearable. I stood in my own kitchen, feeling like an intruder. That weekend, I drove back to my parents' house. I wanted to clear the air. I believed everything was just one big misunderstanding. I found Dad mowing the lawn. Mom was watering flowers. For a brief moment, everything looked normal. Comfortable. Familiar. Then I noticed Ryan's car. He was already there. As soon as I walked inside, the conversation stopped. 3 faces turned toward me. No smiles. No warmth. Only expectation. Mom folded her hands together. I'm glad you came. I smiled uncertainly. Me too. Dad turned off the television. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Then my mother looked directly into my eyes. Emma. We need to talk about your house. And although I didn't know it yet, that conversation would become the beginning of the greatest betrayal of my entire life. The words hung in the air. We need to talk about your house. Not how are you? Not would you like some coffee? Not even it's good to see you. Just my house. For a second, I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe they wanted decorating advice. Maybe they wanted to know how the mortgage worked because they were thinking about downsizing. Maybe I was still making excuses for people who had spent my entire life teaching me that love had to be earned. Mom motioned toward the living room. Sit down. I sat in the same spot on the old brown couch where I had spent countless evenings doing homework as a teenager. Nothing in the room had changed. The faded family photographs still covered the walls. The grandfather clock still ticked steadily in the corner. The same crocheted blanket my grandmother had made decades ago still rested over the arm of Dad's favorite chair. Everything looked familiar. Everything except the expressions on their faces. Dad folded his hands. Ryan leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Mom took a deep breath. Then she smiled. Not warmly. Politely. Like someone preparing to negotiate. Emma, she began softly, you've always had a generous heart. I smiled. Thank you. You've always believed family comes first. I still do. She nodded. That's why we know you'll understand. Something inside me tightened. Understand what? Dad finally spoke. Ryan needs stability. I glanced at my brother. He stared at the carpet. I know he's having a hard time. Mom reached over and patted my hand. And you've been blessed. Blessed. Another word that quietly erased 15 years of sacrifice. You have a good job. You have savings. You have a beautiful home. I nodded slowly. I'm grateful. She smiled wider. So, we think Ryan should move into your house. I expected that. It wasn't what surprised me. It was what came next. Permanently. For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misunderstood. Permanently? Ryan finally looked at me. You've got 2 bedrooms. I know. You don't need both. I laughed nervously. I use one as an office. You can move your desk. I blinked. It isn't just a desk. It's where I work. He shrugged. You can work in the dining room. The room became strangely quiet. I looked at Mom. She wasn't correcting him. I looked at Dad. He wasn't saying anything either. They agreed. Every one of them. I swallowed. I thought we were talking about him staying a few weeks. Mom sighed dramatically. Temporary solutions don't solve permanent problems. So, you want him to live with me forever? Dad answered this time. Until he gets on his feet. Ryan laughed under his breath. We all know that'll take a while. No one smiled. Apparently. That wasn't a joke. I took a slow breath. I love Ryan. You know that. But I bought that house because I wanted my own space. Ryan rolled his eyes. There it is. What? My own space. You've changed. I stared at him. No. I finally have boundaries. Dad frowned. Don't use those therapy words. I almost smiled. I've never been to therapy. You sound like people on television. Mom squeezed my hand again. Emma. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder? I wasn't the one asking someone to give up half their home. I stood and walked toward the kitchen window. The backyard looked peaceful. Birds hopped across the grass. A light breeze moved through the trees. I wished I were back there. Anywhere but inside this conversation. Behind me, Dad cleared his throat. We're not asking for much. I turned around. You want someone to move into my home permanently. We're asking you to help your brother. I already offered. Temporarily. Mom shook her head. That's selfish. The word hit me like cold water. Selfish? I had spent years sending money home. I had postponed vacations. Helped Ryan after every job loss. Paid his car insurance once when he couldn't afford it. Bought Mom a new washing machine. Covered Dad's dental bills. Selfish. I almost laughed. Instead, I quietly asked. When have I ever been selfish? No one answered. Not one person. Finally, Ryan spoke. You've always had everything easy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Easy? You've never struggled like I have. I stared at him. I worked 3 jobs in college. So? I've worked overtime almost every week for 12 years. So? I haven't taken a real vacation in 8 years. So? Every answer was the same. As if none of it mattered. As if effort had no value. Only outcomes. Mom interrupted. There's no point arguing. This isn't about the past. It's about helping family. Family. That word again. It only seemed to matter when they needed something from me. I looked directly at Dad. What do you think? He sighed. I think houses should stay in the family. I frowned. It is in the family. No. I mean, it shouldn't belong to just one person. Something about that sentence unsettled me. It wasn't about Ryan needing help anymore. It sounded like they believed my house belonged to everyone. Except me. I drove home in complete silence. The radio stayed off. My phone remained untouched on the passenger seat. Every traffic light gave me another minute to think. Every mile replayed the conversation. You've changed. You're selfish. You don't need both bedrooms. Houses should stay in the family. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had a headache. I sat in the car for almost 20 minutes. Just staring at my front door. The place that had felt so peaceful only 2 weeks earlier now felt threatened. Not because of strangers. Because of the people I loved most. The next morning was Saturday. I woke early, made coffee, and carried my mug onto the front porch. The neighborhood was quiet. A little boy rode his bicycle down the street while his father jogged beside him. Across the road, an elderly woman watered her flowers. Normal. Peaceful. Exactly why I'd fallen in love with this neighborhood. Then my phone rang. Mom. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Good morning. She sounded cheerful. As if yesterday's conversation had never happened. Morning. What are you doing today? Planting flowers. Oh. A short pause. You know. I've been thinking. Here we go. About what? Your house. I closed my eyes. Mom. If Ryan moves in, he'll help with the yard. I don't need help. He can split utilities. I can afford my utilities. He'll protect you. I almost laughed. This neighborhood is one of the safest in the city. Silence. Then. You always have an answer. No. I had facts. There was a difference. Over the next week. The phone calls continued. Dad called. You shouldn't live alone. Ryan texted. Found a nice bed for the guest room. Mom sent furniture ideas. This couch would look nice if Ryan's TV goes here. I stared at the messages in disbelief. No one had asked. They were planning. Planning my home. Planning my future. Planning my life. Without me. Julia noticed something was wrong almost immediately. We met after work at our favorite little coffee shop. She took one look at me and frowned. You haven't slept. I haven't. What happened now? I told her everything. Every conversation. Every phone call. Every message. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she quietly stirred her coffee. Then she asked. Emma. Have they ever accepted the word no? I thought about it. When Ryan wanted my college savings. No wasn't an option. When Dad needed help paying bills. No wasn't an option. When Mom wanted me to drive home every holiday despite working weekends. No wasn't an option. No. Not once. Julia reached across the table. I think your family has mistaken your kindness for obedience. I stared into my coffee. The sentence hurt because it was true. That night, I started unpacking the last few moving boxes. One was filled with old photo albums. I smiled as I flipped through childhood pictures. Ryan's birthday parties. Christmas mornings. School plays. Then something caught my attention. Almost every photograph centered on Ryan. His baseball games. His graduation. His first car. His birthdays. I was there too. Usually standing in the background. Holding presents. Serving cake. Clapping for him. I kept turning pages. There were surprisingly few pictures that focused only on me. One from kindergarten. One from high school graduation. One from college. That was it. For the first time. I didn't just remember feeling invisible. I could actually see it. Page after page. Year after year. Ryan had always been the center of the story. I had simply been supporting cast. 3 days later, something happened that changed everything. I arrived home from work around 6 o'clock. As I turned into my driveway, I froze. A pickup truck I'd never seen before was parked outside my house. The back was loaded with furniture. Boxes. A mattress. A television. And standing on my front porch, holding a key ring in his hand, was Ryan. Beside him stood my mother. She was smiling, as though today was a celebration. My heart started pounding. I parked so quickly I barely remembered turning off the engine. I stepped out of my car. Ryan. What are you doing? He looked surprised to see me. Oh. You're home early. Then he held up a key. A shiny silver key. One that looked exactly like mine. My stomach dropped. I looked at my mother. Then back at the key. My voice came out as little more than a whisper. How did you get that? Ryan smiled. Mom said you'd understand. At that exact moment, I realized something terrifying. Someone had made a copy of my house key. Without ever asking me. And suddenly, this wasn't just about family anymore. It was about trust. For a second, I honestly couldn't breathe. My eyes stayed fixed on the silver key in Ryan's hand. It looked exactly like mine. Same shape. Same little blue plastic cover I had put on my spare key so I wouldn't confuse it with my office keys. Except, I had only ever owned 2 copies. One stayed on my keychain. The other was inside a small ceramic bowl in the kitchen drawer. No one else was supposed to have one. No one. I slowly walked toward them. Ryan. I kept my voice calm. Give me the key. He looked confused. Why? Because it's my house. Mom stepped between us. Emma, don't make a scene. I looked at her. A scene? You gave someone a key to my home. I made a copy. You what? She sighed as though I were being unreasonable. I had your spare key when I watered your plants after you moved in. I remembered. The week after I bought the house, I had traveled for 2 days for work. Mom had insisted on stopping by to water the flowers I'd planted. I had been grateful. I'd handed her the spare key without thinking twice. When I returned, she'd given it back. Or, at least I thought she had. She had made another copy. Without asking me. Without telling me. My stomach twisted. You copied my house key? Mom crossed her arms. We're family. That's not an answer. I didn't think you'd mind. I do mind. Ryan let out an impatient sigh. Seriously? It's just a key. No. It's access to my home. He laughed. What do you think I'm going to do? Steal your furniture? I wasn't afraid of stolen furniture. I was afraid that no one standing in front of me understood what boundaries meant. I held out my hand. Ryan. The key. He didn't move. Instead, he slipped it into his pocket. I'm going to need it. No. Yes. No. His smile disappeared. Mom's voice grew sharper. Emma. Stop embarrassing your brother. I looked around in disbelief. Embarrassing him? He was standing on my porch with a truck full of furniture he planned to move into my house without permission. Dad's truck pulled into the driveway just then. He climbed out, looked at all of us, and frowned. "What's taking so long?" Ryan answered casually. "Emma's making this difficult." Dad sighed. "I figured." I stared at my father. "You knew about this?" He nodded once. "We all talked. Without me. They had planned this together. Without me. They had rented a moving truck. Packed Ryan's belongings. Copied my key. Driven to my house. Expected to move him in. Without a single conversation where my answer actually mattered. A strange calm settled over me. Not because I wasn't hurt. Because I finally understood something. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a decision they had already made. The only thing left was convincing me to accept it. I looked at Ryan again. "Take the key out of your pocket." He folded his arms. "No." I took one slow step forward. "Ryan. I'm asking nicely." He laughed. "And I'm saying no." For the first time in my life. I didn't feel guilty. I felt angry. Real anger. Not loud. Not explosive. Quiet. Steady. The kind that comes after years of swallowing disappointment. I looked at my mother. "If he doesn't give me that key, I'm changing every lock on this house tonight." Her eyes widened. "You wouldn't." "I would." Dad shook his head. "What a waste of money." I looked at him. "A lot cheaper than losing my peace." Ryan's expression hardened. "So that's it? You're choosing a building over your family?" I answered without hesitation. "I'm choosing respect." Silence. No one seemed to know what to say. Mom was the first to recover. "You've become cold." "No. I've become an adult. I've always been an adult." I just finally realized those are two different things. Dad walked toward me. His voice remained calm. Almost gentle. "Emma. Your mother and I are getting older. I know. We worry. I appreciate that. If Ryan lives with you, we'll all sleep better." I smiled sadly. "But I won't." That sentence surprised even me. Because it was true. Deeply true. For weeks I'd imagined decorating my guest room as a reading space. A place to write. A place to work. A place where I could finally hear my own thoughts. Instead, they saw it as a used space waiting for someone else. Mom suddenly started crying again. The same tears she'd cried on the day she first saw my house. "You don't understand." She covered her face. "We're terrified." I softened. "What are you terrified of?" Her answer came between sobs. "That our family is falling apart." My heart ached. "It doesn't have to." "Then let Ryan stay." There it was again. Love. Attached to a condition. "If you love us, you'll do this. If you care, you'll sacrifice. If you're family, you'll give." I quietly shook my head. "No." The silence that followed seemed endless. Ryan muttered something under his breath. Dad looked disappointed. Mom cried harder. Then Ryan pulled the key out of his pocket. For one hopeful second, I thought he was going to hand it back. Instead, he tossed it onto the porch. It landed near my feet. "There. You happy?" I picked it up. Looked at it. Then looked back at him. No. I'm heartbroken. Without another word, I unlocked my front door, stepped inside, and closed it. I heard knocking almost immediately. Then my mother's voice. Emma. We're not finished talking. Another knock. Then Dad. Open the door. Ryan pounded once with his fist. This is ridiculous. I leaned against the door. My hands were shaking. Not because I wanted to open it. Because I couldn't believe I had to lock my own family out of my own home. After almost 10 minutes. The voices faded. The trucks drove away. Silence returned. But it didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt violated. That evening, I called a locksmith. He arrived within an hour. As he replaced every lock in the house, he smiled politely. Lost your keys? I hesitated. Then quietly answered. No. I lost my trust. He looked at me for a second. Didn't ask another question. Just nodded. Sometimes strangers understand more than family. When the locksmith finished, he handed me 3 brand new keys. Only these work now. I thanked him. Closed the door. And sat on the kitchen floor. The house was quiet. Yet I couldn't stop looking toward the windows. Toward the doors. Toward every room. Home no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like something I had to defend. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages. Ryan. Nice job changing the locks. Mom. You humiliated us. Dad. Call your mother. An aunt. Your parents are devastated. A cousin. Is it true you kicked Ryan out? I frowned. Kicked him out? He had never lived there. By lunchtime, 3 more relatives had called. Each conversation sounded strangely similar. Emma. We heard you threw your brother onto the street. What? I never. Your mother said you promised him a place to live and changed your mind. I sat frozen at my desk. That wasn't what happened. Not even close. Someone had rewritten the story. And somehow, I had become the villain. That evening Julia came over carrying takeout. She found me sitting in the living room surrounded by unopened moving boxes. You haven't unpacked anything. I know. I handed her my phone. She scrolled through the messages. Her eyebrows slowly rose. They're running a campaign. What do you mean? They're controlling the story before you can tell the truth. I sighed. I don't understand. She looked at me carefully. Emma. If everyone believes you're selfish, then asking for more won't seem unreasonable. The sentence settled deep inside me. I had spent my entire life protecting my family's reputation. Never complaining. Never correcting people. Never telling anyone when I was hurt. Now, that silence was being used against me. Saturday afternoon I drove to the grocery store. As I pushed my cart down the produce aisle, I heard someone call my name. Emma? I turned. It was Mrs. Carter. Our old next-door neighbor from my hometown. She smiled politely. I heard about your brother. My stomach tightened. What did you hear? She lowered her voice. That you bought a beautiful house. But refused to help your own family. I stood there speechless. The story had spread over 100 miles. I forced a smile. I'm afraid you've only heard one version. Her expression changed. Oh. I see. She didn't ask any more questions. But I could tell. A seed of doubt had already been planted. Not just in her. In everyone. That night, I opened my laptop. I wasn't planning to work. I simply wanted to distract myself. Instead, an email notification appeared. The sender made my heart skip. Subject: Urgent Family Matter. From my father. I clicked it. The message was only one sentence. If you won't let Ryan live in your house, then we need to discuss transferring ownership for the good of the family. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time. Transferring ownership. Not borrowing. Not sharing. Ownership. My fingers went cold. I realized then. Ryan moving into my guest room had never been the final goal. It had only been the first step. I stared at my father's email until the words blurred together. If you won't let Ryan live in your house, then we need to discuss transferring ownership for the good of the family. Transferring ownership. It sounded so formal. So reasonable. As if we were discussing paperwork for a business. Not the home I had spent 15 years working toward. My hands trembled as I closed my laptop. For the first time. I wasn't just hurt. I was frightened. Because this wasn't about helping Ryan anymore. It was about taking something that belonged to me. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the last few weeks. Mom crying on my porch. Dad refusing to congratulate me. Ryan standing outside my front door with a moving truck. The copied key. The lies they had spread to the rest of the family. And now. The email. It all fit together in a way I hadn't seen before. None of this had happened by accident. They hadn't reacted emotionally. They had made a plan. The next morning, I printed the email before going to work. I don't know why. Maybe because seeing it on paper made it feel real. Maybe because a small voice inside me whispered. Keep everything. That voice had never spoken before. I was glad I listened. At work, I couldn't concentrate. Numbers on my screen blurred together. Emails went unanswered. My manager, Linda, noticed almost immediately. She knocked gently on my office door. You have a minute? I nodded. She sat across from me. You've looked exhausted all week. I hesitated. Then I handed her the printed email. She read it slowly. When she finished, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Emma. Has your father ever asked you for money before? I laughed softly. More times than I can count. What about your brother? Yes. And your mother? Sometimes. She leaned back. Do you keep records? I frowned. Records? Bank transfers. Checks. Receipts. I never thought to. She nodded thoughtfully. I think you should start. That afternoon, during my lunch break, I logged into my online banking. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I simply wanted to remember how much I'd helped over the years. As I scrolled further back, the numbers shocked me. $200. 500. 1,000. Another 300. 800. 1,500. Car repairs. Medical bills. Rent. Utility payments. Christmas gifts. Emergency loans. Some had been repaid. Most hadn't. I downloaded every statement I could find. Then I added the amounts together. When the total appeared on the screen, I stopped breathing. Over the past 11 years, I had given my family $84,000. I checked the number 3 times. Surely I'd made a mistake. I hadn't. $84,000. Enough for another down payment. Enough to change someone's life. Enough that I suddenly understood why my savings had always seemed to grow so slowly. I hadn't just been building my future. I'd been financing everyone else's. That evening, Julia came over again. I showed her the spreadsheet. She stared at the total. Oh my God. I know. You never told me. I didn't realize. She looked at me carefully. No. You didn't let yourself realize. There was a difference. Every transfer had felt small. A few hundred here. 1,000 there. Spread across years. It became a fortune. A fortune I'd never expected back. Because I'd given it out of love. Julia looked up from the spreadsheet. Did they ever thank you? I searched my memory. A birthday card? A heartfelt conversation? A handwritten note? I found almost nothing. Most of the time the response had been, "We'll pay you back." Or, "You're a lifesaver." Then, a week later, another request. The gratitude never lasted longer than the emergency. Saturday morning, I drove to my hometown. Not to see my parents. To visit someone else. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks. She had lived 3 houses down from us for almost 30 years. She'd known my family since before Ryan was born. As a child, I'd spent countless afternoons baking cookies in her kitchen. She answered the door with the same warm smile I remembered. "Emma?" She hugged me tightly. "I've missed you." "So have I." She invited me inside. Nothing had changed. The smell of cinnamon. The old piano. Family photographs covering every wall. She poured tea before quietly asking, "So, what really happened?" I looked up. "You've heard?" She nodded sadly. "Your mother has been calling people." My chest tightened. What has she been saying? Mrs. Brooks hesitated. Then answered gently. That success has changed you. That you're ashamed of your family. That you promised Ryan a home before changing your mind. I felt tears sting my eyes. None of that's true. I know. You do? She smiled sadly. I've known your family a very long time. I stayed quiet. Then she said something that stopped me cold. Emma. I've been waiting years for you to see what everyone else already sees. I frowned. What do you mean? She wrapped both hands around her teacup. When you were 16. Your father came to my husband asking for money. I blinked. I didn't know that. He said it was for household bills. I listened carefully. A week later. I saw Ryan driving a brand new dirt bike. I stared at her. My father said he'd saved for that. Mrs. Brooks gently shook her head. No, sweetheart. He borrowed from 3 neighbors. The room suddenly felt very quiet. She continued. When you left for college. Your parents told everyone how proud they were. I smiled faintly. They told me that. She nodded. But every conversation eventually became about Ryan. Ryan just needs a chance. Ryan deserves the same opportunities. Emma always lands on her feet. I lowered my eyes. Mrs. Brooks reached across the table and touched my hand. They never worried about you. They assumed you'd survive. Because you always did. Her words weren't cruel. They were simply honest. And somehow, that hurt even more. Before I left, she walked me to the front door. Then she stopped me. There's one more thing. I turned back. She hesitated. I'm not sure if I should tell you. What is it? She sighed. 3 months ago. I saw your parents having lunch with Ryan. So? They were celebrating. I frowned. Celebrating what? She looked uncomfortable. I only overheard one sentence. What sentence? She looked directly into my eyes. Your father laughed and said, once Emma buys that house, we'll finally have something worth passing down. I felt the blood drain from my face. No. Mrs. Brooks nodded slowly. I remember it because it sounded strange. I assumed maybe you were buying a vacation home together. I couldn't speak. 3 months ago. Before I'd even closed on the house. Before I'd invited them over. Before my mother cried on my porch. Before Ryan lost his apartment. They'd already been talking about my house. I drove home in complete silence. Every memory suddenly looked different. Ryan's comments. Dad's criticism. Mom's tears. None of it had been spontaneous. They hadn't been reacting to my success. They had been calculating how to benefit from it. The realization shattered something inside me. Not because of the house. Because I had believed every tear. Every worried expression. Every disappointed sigh. I had mistaken manipulation for love. That evening, I opened the old family photo album again. This time, I wasn't looking at the pictures. I was looking at the dates. The years. The patterns. Ryan's achievements filled entire pages. Mine were squeezed into corners. Not because I mattered less. Because somewhere along the way, everyone had agreed that my role wasn't to be celebrated. My role was to provide. At 9 o'clock that night, my phone rang. Dad. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello. His voice was calm. We've had time to think. So have I. I don't want this to become ugly. Neither do I. Then let's solve it. I'm listening. He paused. Then said, I've already spoken to a lawyer. My heart skipped. A lawyer? Yes. I wanted to understand the easiest way to put the house into Ryan's name. For several seconds, I couldn't say a word. My father continued speaking as though we were discussing the weather. It'll save probate later. It'll keep property in the family. It makes financial sense. Finally, I found my voice. Dad. Did you just say, put my house into Ryan's name? Eventually. No. Immediately. Silence. Then. He answered. Yes. I slowly closed my eyes. Every remaining doubt disappeared. This wasn't about helping family. It never had been. They didn't want a room. They didn't want shared space. They wanted the deed. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't fighting to keep a house. I was fighting to keep my own life. I ended the call without another word. Not because I didn't have anything left to say. Because I finally understood that no explanation I gave would ever matter. For 34 years, I had believed that if I could just find the right words, the right amount of patience, the right sacrifice, my family would eventually see me. Not for what I could give, but for who I was. Standing alone in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, I realized something that felt both heartbreaking and strangely peaceful. They had always seen me. They had simply seen me as a resource. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was silent. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, carried a cup of coffee onto the back porch, and watched the first light spread across the yard. The old oak tree swayed gently in the breeze. The rose bushes I had planted were beginning to bloom. For weeks, I had looked at this backyard with fear. Fear that someone would take it. Fear that I would lose the dream I had worked so hard to build. But that morning, something changed. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was determined. The first call I made wasn't to my parents. It wasn't to Ryan. It was to an attorney. A woman named Rachel Monroe, recommended by Linda from work. She specialized in property law. When I arrived at her office later that morning, she welcomed me with a warm smile. "What brings you here today?" I placed my father's email on her desk. Then I showed her the text messages. The printed bank transfers. The notes I'd started keeping after Linda's advice. She read everything carefully. When she finished, she folded her hands. "Emma, I'm glad you came before this went any further." I swallowed. "Can they take my house?" She shook her head. "Not if it's legally yours." Relief washed over me. "But," she continued, "there are a few things I'd like you to do immediately." She gave me a checklist. Never give anyone a copy of your new keys. Keep every text, email, and voicemail. Do not sign any documents your family brings you. If anyone enters your property without permission, document it. Communicate in writing whenever possible. Then she looked me directly in the eyes. "And one more thing." "Yes?" "Stop apologizing." I frowned. "What?" She smiled gently. "You've apologized 6 times during this meeting." I hadn't even noticed. When I left her office, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed. Because someone had finally confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't being selfish. I was protecting something that belonged to me. That evening, another message arrived from my mother. "Can we come over tomorrow? We just want to talk." For the first time in my life. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I waited. 3 hours later, I simply replied, "If you'd like to talk, we can meet at a public cafe." Her response came within seconds. "Why would we do that? We're family." I typed only one sentence. "Because this is the boundary I'm comfortable with." She never replied. 2 days later, my Aunt Carol called. She had always been kind to me. Quiet. The sort of person who listened more than she spoke. "Emma, I think we should have lunch." We met at a small diner halfway between our towns. After the waitress walked away, Aunt Carol reached into her purse. "I've been carrying this around for years." She placed an old envelope on the table. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a birthday card. My 21st birthday. I recognized my grandmother's handwriting immediately. She had passed away years earlier. There was also a folded note. It read, "Emma, you remind me of myself. You give until there's nothing left because you believe love has to be earned. One day I hope you learn something I didn't until I was much older. The people who truly love you don't measure your worth by what you sacrifice for them. Love shouldn't feel like a debt. Grandma." My eyes filled with tears. "I've never seen this." Aunt Carol nodded sadly. "Your mother asked me not to give it to you." I looked up in shock. "What?" She said it would fill your head with strange ideas. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You kept it all these years?" "I promised your grandmother that if the day ever came when you truly needed those words, I'd make sure you got them." I cried harder than I had in weeks. Not because of the letter. Because for the first time, someone in my family had protected me. Over the next month, something unexpected happened. Silence. No surprise visits. No moving trucks. No phone calls demanding explanations. Only occasional texts asking if I had come to my senses. I didn't answer. I spent that month doing something I had almost forgotten how to do. Living. I planted tomatoes beside the fence. I painted the guest room soft sage green. Not for Ryan. For myself. I turned it into a reading room with a comfortable chair beside the window. Every evening after work, I sat there with a book and a cup of tea. For years, I'd imagined peace. Now I was finally living it. One Saturday morning, there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole. Dad. Alone. I hesitated before opening it. He looked older. More tired. His shoulders seemed lower than I remembered. I won't stay long. I nodded. We stood on the porch. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, he sighed. Your mother isn't taking this well. I remained quiet. Ryan's angry. Still. I said nothing. Then he looked at the house. It's a nice place. Those 4 words almost made me smile. Almost. They're the first nice thing you've said about it. He looked away. I suppose they are. I waited. He cleared his throat. You know, I always thought parents were supposed to make things equal. I frowned. Equal? If one child had something, the other should too. I took a slow breath. Dad. Equal doesn't mean taking from one child to give to another. He didn't answer. Instead, he quietly nodded. For a brief moment, I thought he understood. Then he asked. So, there's really no chance you'll sign the house over? My heart sank. Even now. After everything. That was still why he had come. I smiled sadly. No. There isn't. He lowered his head. I figured. Without another word. He walked back to his truck and drove away. That was the last time I saw him for almost a year. Months passed. Autumn turned the maple trees brilliant shades of gold and red. Winter covered the neighborhood in soft white snow. Then spring arrived again. Life slowly settled into something peaceful. One afternoon, I received an invitation. My cousin Emily was getting married. For a long time, I considered not going. But eventually, I decided I wouldn't hide from people who had judged me without asking the truth. The reception was beautiful. A renovated barn surrounded by fields of wildflowers. As I walked inside, conversations slowed. People noticed me. Whispers followed. Then something surprising happened. Mrs. Brooks walked straight toward me. She hugged me tightly. It's good to see you. Aunt Carol joined us. Then another cousin. Then another. One by one, people began asking what had really happened. Not accusing. Simply asking. And for the first time in my life, I told the truth. Calmly. Without anger. Without exaggeration. Just the truth. About the copied key. The moving truck. The email asking for my house. The bank transfers. The lies. When I finished, no one spoke for several seconds. Finally, an older uncle quietly shook his head. I had no idea. Neither had most of them. They had only heard my parents' version. Across the room, I noticed my mother. She was watching. Our eyes met. For just a second. I saw something I hadn't expected. Not anger. Not disappointment. Regret. Whether it was regret for what she'd done, or regret that her plan had failed, I honestly don't know. She looked away first. We never spoke that evening. A few weeks later, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single handwritten note. I don't know if you'll ever forgive us, but I finally understand that we kept asking you to prove your love while never proving ours. It wasn't signed. There was no apology for the house. No explanation. Just those words. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. I folded the note carefully and placed it inside the same box as my grandmother's letter. Not because everything was forgiven, but because healing doesn't always begin with perfect apologies. Sometimes it begins with the truth finally being spoken. Today, as I tell you this story, I'm sitting on the same front porch where my mother once cried because I had become a homeowner. Only now, the tears are mine. Not tears of heartbreak. Tears of gratitude. The roses are taller. The oak tree casts more shade. The house feels warm. Safe. Mine. People often ask if losing my relationship with my parents was worth keeping the house. I always tell them, this story was never really about a house. It was about finally understanding that love should never require you to surrender your dignity. For years, I believed being a good daughter meant saying yes. Now I know that sometimes the most loving word you can say, to yourself, is no. Because healthy love celebrates your success. It doesn't mourn it. It protects your peace. It doesn't demand your sacrifice. And the strongest foundation I ever built wasn't made of bricks, wood, or concrete. It was the boundary that finally allowed me to come home. Not just to my house, but to myself.